The bus shelter smelled like old beer and wet wool. Danny Mercer sat on the plastic bench with his backpack between his feet. His sneakers were soaked through from walking 3 miles in the February rain. The left one had a hole near the pinky toe. He could feel the cold water squishing every time he moved. It was 6:15 in the morning in Southside Chicago. The sky was that ugly gray that comes before the real snow. He had not slept in 22 hours. Danny was 43 years old. He had been homeless for 11 months now. That number lived inside his chest like a stone he could not cough up. 11 months since he lost the apartment on 79th Street. 11 months since his wife Karen told him to leave for good. 11 months since his daughter Mia stopped answering his texts. He still sent one every morning anyway. She never wrote back. He did not blame her. The CTA bus came hissing to the curb. Danny stood up slow. His knees ached from sleeping on the floor of the LaGrange overpass last night. He pulled his hood up and got on. The driver was a heavy black woman named Darlene, who worked the early route 5 days a week. She nodded at him without saying anything. He nodded back. That was their whole relationship. She let him ride past his stop sometimes when the rain was bad. He never asked her to. She just did it. He dropped his last $3 in the fare box. $3 was all he had until his general assistance check came in 4 days.
4 days was a long time when you had no food and no place to be warm. He walked to the back of the bus and sat down. The heat felt like a hand on his face. He closed his eyes for just a second, just to feel the warmth. He was not sleeping. He had stopped letting himself sleep in public places after someone stole his boots at the Harrison Street shelter. That was back in June. He still remembered waking up and looking down at his socks. The guy was already gone. The boots were gone. It took him 3 weeks to find another pair at the Salvation Army that fit right. The bus turned onto Western Avenue. Danny watched the city wake up through the streaked window. Men in hard hats waited at stops with coffee cups. Women in scrubs stared at phones. Kids in puffy coats dragged backpacks almost as big as their bodies. All these people going somewhere. All these people who had somewhere to go. He did not hate them for it. He used to be them. 5 years ago, he was one of those guys in a hard hat. He worked roofing for a small company out of Bridgeport. Good money, good crew. He could still do that job in his sleep. Then his back went out. Danny had always been good with his hands. That was the one thing he was genuinely good at. He could fix almost anything. A leaking sink, a broken furnace, a roof that was falling apart. He learned it from his father, who learned it from his grandfather. It was the only thing the Mercer men passed down that ever mattered.
Danny could look at something broken and just see how it went back together. That was not a skill you could learn in a book. It was a feeling. His father used to say Danny had the gift, and for 20 years that gift paid the bills. But roofing destroyed his lower back by the time he turned 40. He kept working through the pain because what else was he supposed to do? The doctor gave him a prescription for the pain. That was the beginning of the end. He did not understand that at the time. He just took the pills and went back up on the roof. The pills worked great at first. Too great. He started needing more to get through the day. Then he started needing them to get through the morning. Then he was buying them from a guy on the south side because the doctor cut him off. Then he was spending money he did not have on pills that were slowly taking everything away. Karen knew before he did. She always knew. She found the empty bottles in the garage. She found the money missing from their joint account. She gave him chances. She gave more chances than he deserved. But when she pawned her mother's wedding ring for $120 worth of oxycodone, that was the last chance. She told him to leave on a Tuesday. He remembered the exact Tuesday because the Bears were playing that night and he never got to watch the game. Instead, he packed a gym bag and walked out the front door of the house on Maplewood Avenue. The house he bought when Mia was 2 years old.
The house where he taught her to ride a bike in the driveway. The house where he used to be a man instead of whatever he had become. That was 2 years before he ended up on the street. The fall was not instant. It took a full year of couch surfing and sleeping in his car and staying with guys from the old crew who eventually stopped answering their doors. His car got repossessed in March. He could not make the payments because he could not keep a job, because he could not pass a drug test, because he could not stop taking the pills. By April, he was at the shelter. By May, he was out of the shelter because he could not follow their rules about curfew. He was still using then. Not a lot. Just enough to take the edge off. Just enough to make the shame feel smaller for a few hours. He stopped using in July. He stopped because he woke up under the L tracks on a Sunday morning, and a little girl walked past him holding her father's hand. She was maybe 6 years old. She had pink sneakers with lights in the heels that flashed when she walked. She looked at him and then looked at her dad and asked why that man was sleeping on the ground. The dad pulled her closer and walked faster. He did not answer her question. Danny watched them disappear around the corner, and something inside him cracked open. He thought about Mia at 6 years old. Mia and her pink sneakers. Mia holding his hand on the way to school. He had not held his daughter's hand in 2 years.
He did not know if she would even let him anymore. That morning, he threw the last of his pills down a storm drain. He did not make a big deal about it. He did not tell anyone. He just watched the little white circles fall through the grate and disappear into the dark water. Then he walked to the public library on Western Avenue and sat in the bathroom and cried for 20 minutes. A janitor knocked on the door and asked if he was okay. Danny said he was fine. The janitor did not believe him, but he did not push. He just slid a granola bar under the door and walked away. Danny still thought about that janitor sometimes. He never saw his face. He did not know his name. But that granola bar was the first kind thing anyone had done for him in months that did not come with a condition attached. He kept the wrapper in his backpack for a long time. It reminded him that there were still good people in the world. People who saw someone hurting and did something small that meant everything. The bus stopped at 87th Street. Danny got off and walked toward the library. It was still too early for the doors to open, but he knew a spot around the side where the heating vent pumped out warm air. He sat down on the concrete with his back against the brick wall. His soaked sneakers were starting to freeze now that he was not moving. He took them off and wrung out his socks. The water was almost black from the dirty slush on the sidewalks. He put the wet socks back on and stuffed his feet into the cold sneakers. There was no point complaining about it. Complaining was a luxury for people with dry socks. He pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked in 3 places, but it still worked most of the time. He had 5% battery left and no charger. He would have to find an outlet inside the library later. He opened his messages and stared at the last text he sent to Mia. It was from yesterday morning. It just said, "Good morning, baby girl, I love you." No response. The one before that was the same, and the one before that. He had been sending those texts every single day for 11 months. 335 days of "I love you" sent into a void. He did not know if she read them. He hoped she read them. His mother was still alive. She lived in a small apartment in Inglewood. She was 71 years old, and she loved Danny more than anything in the world. But she did not have room for him. Her apartment was a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a walk-up building with no elevator. She had COPD and could barely take care of herself. Danny visited her once a week. He brought her groceries when he had money. He cleaned her kitchen and changed her air filters and made sure her meds were organized. That was the one thing he still did right. That was the one place he still felt like a son instead of a failure. His mother never judged him. Not once. She knew about the pills. She knew about Karen leaving.
She knew about the house and the car and everything else. She never said, "I told you so." She never said, "You did this to yourself." She just held his hand and told him she was proud of him for still showing up. That was the word she used, showing up. She said most people in his situation would disappear. They would hide from everyone who knew them before. But Danny kept showing up. He kept coming to her door every week with whatever he could carry. And to his mother, that meant more than a house or a job or anything else. The library opened at 9. Danny had 2 hours to kill in the cold. He stood up and started walking in circles around the parking lot. Moving kept the blood moving. Standing still let the cold settle into his bones. He walked and thought about the job fair he went to last week at the community center on Halsted. He wore the only nice shirt he owned, a blue button-up he found at Goodwill for $4. He stood in line behind 40 other guys who all looked just like him, guys with tired eyes and old clothes and the same desperate hunger for someone to say yes. He talked to a man from a warehouse company. The man asked about the gap in his employment history. Danny told him the truth about his back and his recovery. The man nodded and took his paper application and said they would be in touch. Danny knew they would not be in touch. He had given that same paper application to 20 other people in the past 3 months. Nobody ever called.
The library doors finally opened. Danny was the third person inside. He went straight to the bathroom and washed his face with cold water and paper towels. He looked at himself in the mirror. His beard was patchy and gray. His eyes had dark circles underneath that made him look older than his mother. His cheekbones stuck out more than they used to. He had lost 35 pounds since July. Some of it was from not using anymore. Most of it was from not eating enough. He did not recognize the man looking back at him. That man looked like someone who had given up. And Danny had not given up. Not yet. He was still here, still standing, still sending those texts every morning, still showing up at his mother's door, still carrying his soaked sneakers through the winter alleys because he had no other shoes to wear. He found a computer in the back corner near the windows. He sat down and opened his email. Nothing from Karen, nothing from Mia, nothing from any of the jobs he applied to. Just spam and a notice from the library saying his account was almost overdue. He closed the email and opened a new tab. He typed in a search for overnight warehouse jobs on the South Side. He spent the next hour filling out applications on websites that barely worked. The library computer was slow and the keyboard had missing keys. He had to press the letter E 3 times every time he needed it. But he kept going. Application after application. Same information every time. His name,
his address, which was the shelter on 63rd Street, his phone number, which was the cracked phone in his pocket, his work history, which ended 2 years ago, his explanation for the gap, which he typed the same way every time, medical leave, fully recovered, ready to work. He did not mention the pills. He did not mention the 11 months on the street. He just said medical leave and hoped someone would believe him. Around 11 in the morning, a librarian named Mrs. Jackson came by with a cart of books. She was a small woman with gray hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She knew Danny by name. She knew a lot of the regulars by name. That was the kind of librarian she was. She stopped by his computer and asked if he had eaten today. Danny said he was fine. Mrs. Jackson reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in a napkin. She set it on the desk next to his keyboard. She did not make a big deal about it. She just smiled and walked away with her cart. Danny unwrapped the sandwich and ate it in 4 bites. It was the best thing he had tasted in days. He stayed at the library until they closed at 6. He spent the whole day filling out applications and watching YouTube videos about warehouse safety and forklift certification. He learned what he could from the videos, even though he had no way to get certified without money. He took notes in a little notebook he kept in his backpack. The notebook was almost full now.
He had written down bus routes and shelter rules and phone numbers for food pantries and the names of social workers who actually helped instead of just talking. He had written down the dates of his court hearing for child support and the address of the free clinic on Cottage Grove and the prayer his mother taught him when he was a boy that he still said every night, even though he was not sure he believed in God anymore. The prayer was short. It just said, "God, please let me be somebody my daughter can be proud of." That was it. That was the whole prayer. He said it every night before he closed his eyes. He said it on the floor of the LaGrange overpass and in the corner of the shelter, and on the bus when he was the only passenger at 2 in the morning. He said it so many times that the words had worn smooth, like stones in a river. They did not feel like a prayer anymore. They felt like breathing. The sun went down and the temperature dropped. Danny left the library and walked toward the shelter on 63rd Street. He did not like the shelter. Nobody liked the shelter. But it was February in Chicago, and the cold would kill a man who stayed outside all night. He had seen it happen. He had walked past a man sleeping in a doorway on Pulaski Road last January. The man was not sleeping. The man was dead, frozen solid with his arms crossed over his chest like he was just taking a nap. Danny never forgot that image. He saw it every time he thought about skipping the shelter and sleeping outside to avoid the chaos inside. The shelter was a converted warehouse with cots lined up in rows. It smelled like bleach and feet and fear. Danny signed in at the front desk. A young guy named Marcus was working the check-in. Marcus was maybe 25 years old. He had been homeless himself a few years ago. Now he worked the overnight shift at the shelter because he said he wanted to be the person he needed when he was on the other side of that desk. He was good at the job. He remembered names. He knew who was struggling with what. He never looked down on anyone. Danny respected Marcus more than almost anyone he had met in the past 11 months. Marcus handed him a thin blanket and a pillow without a case. He pointed towards an empty cot near the back wall. Danny nodded and walked through the rows of men. Some of them were already asleep. Some of them were sitting up, talking in low voices. Some of them were crying. That was the part nobody talked about, the crying. Grown men crying themselves to sleep on cots in a converted warehouse because they had lost everything and did not know how to get it back. Danny had done his share of crying in this place. He would probably do more before he left. He lay down on the cot and pulled the blanket up to his chin. The blanket was thin and scratchy and smelled like the guy who used it before him. Danny did not care. He was warm. That was enough.
He closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of the shelter. A guy coughing 2 rows over. Someone snoring loud enough to shake the floor. The radiator banging in the corner. Marcus's footsteps walking the aisles. The sound of a door opening and closing as someone came in from the cold. Danny reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He had 1% battery left. He opened his messages and typed the same thing he typed every night before he tried to sleep. "Good night, baby girl. I love you, and I am trying." He sent the message and watched the little gray check mark appear. Then he turned off the phone to save the battery. He put it back in his pocket and put his hand on top of it. His hand over his phone, over his heart. That was his ritual now. That was how he fell asleep, holding on to the only thing that connected him to his daughter, holding on to the hope that one day she would write back. He said his prayer. "God, please let me be somebody my daughter can be proud of." Then he closed his eyes and waited for sleep to come. It did not come easy. It never did. But it came. And for a few hours, Danny Mercer did not have to think about his wet sneakers, or his empty stomach, or the 11 months that had turned him into a man he did not recognize. He just slept. And when he woke up in the morning, he would put his wet shoes back on. He would walk to the library. He would fill out more applications. He would send another text. He would show up at his mother's door.
He would keep going, because stopping was not an option, because somewhere out there his daughter was growing up without him, and the only thing he could do was become someone worth coming back to. The radiator banged again. Someone cried out in their sleep. Danny turned over and pulled the blanket tighter. He thought about the job interview he had scheduled for Thursday, a warehouse on the south side near the Ford plant, a real interview with a real manager, the first one in 3 months. He had lied on the phone to get it. He said he had reliable transportation. He did not mention that his transportation was 2 wet sneakers and a bus pass he could not afford to refill. He would figure that part out later. He always figured it out. That was what 11 months on the street had taught him. You figure it out, or you die. And Danny Mercer was not ready to die. He thought about his mother. He would see her on Sunday. He would bring her the canned vegetables he got from the food pantry last week. He would change the filter in her air conditioner, even though it was February and she did not need it. He would sit with her and watch the news and let her hold his hand. She would ask him if he was eating enough. He would say yes, even though it was not true. She would tell him she was proud of him. He would believe her, even though he did not understand why. That was the deal they had. She believed in him, so he did not have to believe in himself all the time.
She carried enough hope for both of them. Outside, the wind picked up. The temperature was dropping into the teens. Men were still out there, in doorways and under bridges, and inside abandoned buildings that offered no protection from the cold. Danny thought about them as he lay on his cot. He thought about the man on Pulaski Road who did not wake up. He thought about the janitor with the granola bar. He thought about Mrs. Jackson and her peanut butter sandwich. He thought about Marcus walking the aisles. He thought about all the small kindnesses that had kept him alive. Not big things, not miracles. Just people being human to other humans. That was what held the world together. That was what made Danny believe that maybe he was not completely alone. He fell asleep with his hand over his phone. He dreamed about Mia. She was 6 years old again, and she was riding her bike in the driveway. She had pink sneakers with lights in the heels. She was laughing. He was pushing her bike from behind. She kept telling him to let go. He kept telling her he would let go when she was ready. And in the dream, she turned around and looked at him and said, "Daddy, I am ready." Then she rode away from him. She rode down Maplewood Avenue and turned the corner and disappeared. And Danny stood in the driveway with his hands empty and watched her go. He woke up with tears on his face. The shelter was dark except for the exit lights. Marcus was still walking the aisles. The snoring guy was still snoring.
The radiator was still banging. Danny wiped his face with the back of his hand and checked his phone, even though he knew it was dead. He put it back in his pocket. He closed his eyes. He said his prayer again. He waited for morning. The morning came ugly and gray. Danny woke up before the lights came on. That was his habit now. Wake up early before the chaos started. Before the men started yelling and the cots started folding and the smell of the place got so thick you could taste it. He sat up slow and stretched his back. The cot had done its usual damage. His spine felt like someone had replaced his vertebrae with broken glass. He stood up and winced and waited for the pain to settle into something he could walk on. His sneakers were still wet from yesterday. They would always be wet now. February in Chicago did not give you dry shoes. You just accepted it. You put them on and you walked and you stopped thinking about the squishing sound, because thinking about it would drive you crazy. Danny tied the laces tight and stood up. He folded his blanket and left it on the cot for someone else to use. That was another rule he made for himself. Leave things better than you found them. It was a small rule, a tiny rule, but it kept him from feeling like an animal. Marcus was at the front desk drinking coffee from a styrofoam cup. He nodded at Danny and pointed to a box of donuts on the counter. Someone had donated them yesterday. They were stale, but they were free.
Danny took 2 and shoved them in his pocket. He would eat them at the library later. He signed out and walked into the morning. The cold hit him like a slap. His breath turned to steam. His ears started hurting within 30 seconds. He pulled his hood up and started walking toward Western Avenue. The streets were empty at this hour. Just a few cars and a few buses and a few other men in hoodies walking the same direction. They all moved the same way, heads down, hands in pockets, shoulders hunched against the wind. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody said good morning. That was not rudeness. That was survival. Eye contact in this part of the city at this hour could get you asked for something you did not have to give. Danny walked past a church on the corner of 71st. The doors were still locked, but he could see lights on inside. Someone was in there praying or cleaning or getting ready for the day. He stopped for a second and looked at the cross on the door. He was not a church guy. He had not been inside a church for anything except a food pantry in years. But something about that cross made him stop, made him think about his mother, made him think about the prayer he said every night. He stood there for maybe 10 seconds. Then he kept walking. The library did not open for 2 more hours. Danny knew a spot, a laundromat on 75th, but stayed open all night. The owner was a Vietnamese guy named Mr. Tran who did not ask questions.
He let homeless people sit in the back corner by the dryers as long as they did not cause trouble. Danny had spent many cold mornings in that laundromat. He knew which dryers put out the most heat. He knew which chairs had armrests you could sleep on without falling off. He pushed open the door and walked in. The place smelled like soap and hot metal. Mr. Tran was behind the counter folding towels. He looked up and nodded. Danny nodded back. That was their whole relationship. No names, no stories, just a nod and a warm place to sit. Danny went to the back corner and sat down in the plastic chair next to the big dryer. The heat coming off the machine felt like heaven. He closed his eyes and let it soak into his wet sneakers. His toes started to tingle as the blood came back. He ate one of the stale donuts. It tasted like sugar and cardboard. He did not care. He pulled out his phone. Still dead. He needed a charger. He would find one at the library. He put the phone away and opened his notebook. He read through his notes from yesterday. Warehouse jobs, forklift certification. A phone number for a guy who knew a guy who hired day labor near the stockyards. Danny circled that number. He would call it today if he could find a working phone. His own phone was useless without battery, but the library had phones. The library had everything if you knew where to look. An old woman came in with a basket of clothes. She was maybe 70 years old. She wore a heavy coat and boots that looked like they had walked 1,000 miles. She put her clothes in a machine and sat down 2 seats away from Danny. She did not look at him. She stared at the wall with empty eyes. Danny knew that stare. He had seen it on his own face in the library bathroom mirror. That was the stare of someone who had given up but was still breathing. He wanted to say something to her. He wanted to say, "I see you, and I am sorry." But he did not know how to say that to a stranger. So he just sat there. 2 empty people sitting in a laundromat at 6 in the morning, both of them just trying to make it to the next hour. The heat from the dryer made him sleepy. He did not fight it. He leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. He did not sleep. He just rested. He let his mind drift. He thought about Karen. He wondered where she was living now. He wondered if she had met someone new. The thought made his chest hurt, but he did not look away from it. He deserved that hurt. He had earned it. He had broken something that was never supposed to break, and no amount of wishing would put it back together. He thought about Mia. She would be 15 now, a sophomore in high school. She had her mother's smile and his stubbornness. That was a dangerous combination. He wondered if she was dating anyone. He wondered if she was doing okay in school. He wondered if she ever thought about him at all.
The last time he saw her face to face was the day Karen told him to leave. Mia was in her room with the door closed. She did not come out to say goodbye. He stood in a hallway and looked at her door and waited. He waited 5 minutes. She did not open it. He left without saying goodbye. He had been saying goodbye from a distance ever since. The laundromat clock said 7:30. Danny stood up and stretched. His sneakers were still wet, but less wet than before. The dryer had done some work. He walked past Mr. Tran and nodded. Mr. Tran nodded back. That was it. That was the whole conversation. Danny stepped back into the cold and walked toward the library. The sky was lighter now. The sun was trying to break through the gray. It was not working, but the attempt mattered. Danny watched the city wake up again. The same buses, the same hard hats, the same kids with backpacks. He was part of it now. Not really, but he was there. He was present. He was not hiding under a bridge or nodding off in an alley. He was walking to the library to find a job. That counted for something. It had to count for something. The library doors were open. Danny went inside and found his usual computer. He plugged his phone into the USB port on the side of the monitor. The screen lit up with a battery symbol. He had power. He had a computer. He had 2 stale donuts in his pocket. That was a good morning by the standards of his current life.
He ate the second donut while he waited for the computer to wake up. He checked his email. Nothing. He checked it again. Still nothing. He opened the job sites and started filling out more applications. He did this for 3 hours, application after application, same information, same address at the shelter, same phone number, same story about medical leave. He applied at a warehouse in Bedford Park. He applied at a shipping company near Midway Airport. He applied at a grocery store on 87th Street. He applied at a car wash on Cicero Avenue. He did not care what the job was. He just needed someone to say yes, someone to give him a chance, someone to look past the gap in his resume and see the man who still showed up every day, even when showing up felt impossible. Around 11 o'clock, Mrs. Jackson came by with her cart. She saw Danny at his computer and smiled. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an orange. Not a sandwich today, an orange. She set it on the desk next to his keyboard. Danny said thank you. Mrs. Jackson said, "You are welcome, young man." She called him young man even though he was 43 years old and looked 60. He liked that about her. She saw something in him that the mirror did not show. She saw the person he used to be. Maybe she saw the person he could still become. He peeled the orange and ate it slowly. The juice ran down his fingers. He licked it off because wasting food was not something he could afford. The orange was sweet and cold and perfect. He saved the peel in his pocket. He did not know why. It just felt wrong to throw it away. Everything felt precious now. Everything felt like it might be the last of something. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. A text message. His heart stopped. It was from Mia, again and again. "Hi, Dad." Not, "I love you." Not, "I miss you." Not, "I forgive you." Just, "Hi, Dad." But it was something. It was the first something in 11 months. She had not blocked him. She had not changed her number. She had read every single one of those messages, and she had not responded until now. But now she had responded. Now she had said, "Hi, Dad." He typed back. His fingers could barely hit the right letters. "Hey, baby girl, how are you?" He stared at the screen, waiting for 3 little dots to appear. Nothing happened. He waited 5 minutes. Nothing. He waited 10 minutes. Nothing. He put the phone down and picked it up again. Still nothing. He wanted to type more. He wanted to ask her everything. He wanted to tell her everything. But he stopped himself. He did not want to scare her away. He did not want to push too hard. She had taken 11 months to say, "Hi, Dad." She would take her own time to say the next thing. He had to be patient. He had to let her come to him.
He put the phone face up on the desk so he could see the screen. He went back to his applications, but he could not focus. His mind was stuck on those 2 words, "Hi, Dad." He wondered what had made her reach out. Was she sad? Was she lonely? Did something happen with Karen? Did she just wake up this morning and decide to be brave? He would never know unless she told him, and she had not told him anything yet. Just, "Hi, Dad." The afternoon crawled by. Danny filled out 12 more applications. He watched more YouTube videos about forklifts. He took more notes in his notebook. He checked his phone every 30 seconds. No new messages. The screen stayed dark. He wanted to text her again. He wanted to say, "I love you so much it hurts." But he did not. He just waited. At 3 o'clock, a man sat down at the computer next to him. The man was younger, maybe 25. He had a black eye and a busted lip, and his hands were shaking. He smelled like alcohol and sweat. He tried to log into the computer, but his hands were shaking too hard to type. Danny watched him for a minute. Then he leaned over and asked if the guy needed help. The guy looked at him with eyes that had given up a long time ago. He said he was trying to find a detox bed. He said he had been drinking for 6 days straight, and he wanted to stop, but he could not do it alone. Danny knew that feeling. He knew it in his bones. Danny helped the guy search for detox centers on the south side.
They found one on 55th Street that had a bed open. Danny wrote down the address and the phone number. He asked the guy if he had bus fare. The guy shook his head. Danny reached into his pocket and pulled out the last dollar he had been saving for coffee. He gave it to the guy. The guy started crying, right there in the library, a grown man crying over $1. Danny put his hand on the guy's shoulder and squeezed. He said, "You can do this. I know you can, because I did it." The guy wiped his face and stood up and walked out of the library without saying thank you. He did not need to say thank you. Danny understood. Mrs. Jackson saw the whole thing from across the room. She walked over with her cart and stood next to Danny. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "That was a good thing you did." Danny said, "I just gave him $1. Mrs. Jackson said, "No, you gave him hope. That is worth more than $1. Danny looked at his empty hands and thought about what she said. He hoped she was right. The library closed at 6. Danny packed up his things and walked out into the cold. His phone was still dead from the morning, even though he had charged it all day. The battery was old and tired. It could not hold a charge anymore. Just like him, just like everything else in his life. He walked toward the shelter, but he did not want to go there. The shelter was a tomb. It was a place where men went to wait for something that never came. He wanted to be somewhere else. He wanted to be anywhere else. He walked past a pawn shop on 79th Street. The sign said, "We buy gold and electronics and tools." Danny stopped and looked at the window. He saw his reflection in the glass. Same tired face, same gray beard, same dark circles. But something was different today. He could not name it. He just felt different, lighter somehow, like a small weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He thought about the guy with the black eye. He thought about Leah's text. He thought about the orange and the granola bar and the peanut butter sandwich, all the small kindnesses that had carried him this far. He was still here, still standing, still carrying his wet sneakers through the winter alleys. He kept walking. He walked past the shelter and kept going. He walked down 63rd Street toward the expressway. The wind picked up and the temperature dropped, but he did not care. He needed to move. He needed to feel his legs working. He needed to remind himself that he was still alive and still capable of something. He walked under the expressway and heard the cars rushing overhead. The sound was loud and constant, like a river, like the ocean, like something that would never stop. He thought about the interview tomorrow, the warehouse job near the Ford plant. He had lied about transportation. He had lied about a lot of things. But he showed up. That was the part that mattered. He showed up. And tomorrow he would show up again. He would put on his only clean shirt and his wet sneakers, and he would walk into that warehouse and look that manager in the eye and ask for a chance. And maybe the manager would say yes, and maybe he would say no. Either way, Danny would still be here tomorrow night. He would still be walking these streets. He would still be sending those texts. He would still be saying his mother's prayer. He stopped walking. He was standing in front of a small brick building with a sign that said St. Mary's Employment Center. The lights were on inside. He could see people sitting at desks and talking on phones. He had walked past this building 100 times and never gone inside. He did not know why. Fear, maybe, or pride, or the same stubborn refusal to ask for help that had kept him on the street for 11 months. But tonight he was tired of being stubborn. Tonight he was tired of doing it alone. He pushed open the door and walked in. The woman at the front desk had red hair and a kind face. She looked up at Danny and smiled like she had been waiting for him. Her name tag said Deborah. She asked how she could help him. Danny stood there with his mouth open. He had not planned this. He had not rehearsed what to say. He just walked in because something told him to walk in. He told her he needed a job. He told her he had been homeless for almost a year. He told her about his back and the pills and the wife and the daughter who just now started talking to him again. He told her everything.
It all came out like water from a broken pipe. Deborah did not flinch. She did not look away. She just listened. When he finished talking, she handed him a tissue. He did not realize he was crying until he felt the paper in his hand. He wiped his face and sat down in the plastic chair next to her desk. Deborah opened a file and started writing. She asked him questions. What kind of work could he do? What was his skill? What was the one thing he was better at than anyone else? Danny said he could fix anything. He said he had been fixing things since he was a kid. He said put a broken thing in front of him and he would make it work again. Deborah closed her file and picked up the phone. She dialed a number and talked to someone on the other end. She said she had a man in her office who was worth taking a chance on. She said he was a good man who had made some bad choices, but those choices did not define him. She said his name was Danny Mercer, and he could fix anything. She listened for a minute and then she smiled. She hung up the phone and looked at Danny. She said, "Be at this address tomorrow at 7 in the morning." She wrote down an address on a piece of paper and handed it to him. It was a repair shop on Archer Avenue. The owner was an old man named Frank who needed someone to fix appliances. Frank did not care about resumes. Frank cared about whether you could do the job. Danny folded the paper and put it in his pocket next to the orange peel. He thanked Deborah.
He thanked her more than once. He thanked her until she told him to stop. She said, "Do not thank me yet. Go to the interview, get the job, then come back and thank me." Danny nodded and walked out of the building. The cold hit him again, but it did not feel as cold this time. Something had changed. Something inside him had shifted. He walked back toward the shelter with his hands in his pockets and his head up. He looked at the sky and saw a few stars through the clouds. He had not looked at the stars in months. He had forgotten they were up there. The next morning, Danny woke up before the lights came on. He washed his face in the shelter bathroom. He put on his blue button-up shirt from Goodwill. It was wrinkled, but it was clean. He brushed his teeth with a toothbrush he had been using for 3 months. He looked at himself in the mirror. The same tired face looked back, but the eyes were different today. There was something in them that had not been there yesterday. Hope, maybe, or fear dressed up like hope. He could not tell the difference anymore. He walked to Archer Avenue. It was a long walk from the shelter, almost 4 miles. His sneakers were wet before he got halfway there. His back hurt, his knees hurt, everything hurt, but he kept walking. He walked past the pawn shop and the laundromat and the church with the cross on the door.
He walked past the places where he had slept, and the corners where he had cried, and the bus stops where he had prayed for something to change. He walked past all of it and did not look back. The repair shop was a small gray building between a tire shop and a vacant lot. The sign said Frank's Appliance Repair since 1987. The paint was peeling. The windows were dirty. But the lights were on, and Danny could hear the sound of someone working inside. He knocked on the door. A man opened it. The man was old, maybe 70. He had white hair and thick glasses and hands that looked like they had been fixing things for 50 years.
He looked at Danny up and down. He looked at the wrinkled shirt and the wet sneakers and the tired face. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Deborah sent you." Danny said, "Yes, sir." Frank said, "Can you fix a washing machine?" Danny said, "Yes, sir." Frank opened the door wider and let him in. The shop was a mess. Washing machines and dryers and refrigerators were stacked everywhere. Parts and tools covered every surface. It smelled like grease, dust, and old coffee. Frank led Danny to a washing machine in the corner. He said, "This one stopped spinning. Figure out what is wrong with it." He handed Danny a screwdriver and walked away. Danny took a deep breath. He had not fixed anything in 2 years. His hands remembered the work before his brain did. He took off the back panel of the machine and looked inside. He saw the belt first. It was loose.
Almost falling off. He saw the motor next. It was covered in lint and dust. He cleaned the motor with his fingers. He tightened the belt. He put the panel back on. He plugged in the machine and ran a cycle. The drum spun. It spun smooth and quiet and perfect. Frank came back and watched the machine run. He did not say anything. He just watched. Then he looked at Danny and asked how he knew it was the belt. Danny said because it was always the belt. He said washing machines break the same way every time. The belt loosens, or the motor clogs, or the pump fails. You start with the belt, then you check the motor, then you check the pump. You do it in that order, and you fix the machine every time. Frank nodded. He said you start Monday, $8 an hour cash, 40 hours a week, maybe more if you are as good as you say. Danny said thank you. Frank said do not thank me, just show up. Danny said I will show up. Frank looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, I know you will. Danny walked out of the repair shop and stood on the sidewalk. The sun was up now. The gray sky had broken into pieces of blue. He pulled out his phone and looked at the screen. No messages from Mia. That was okay. She had said, "Hi, Dad." That was enough for now. He typed a new message. He said, I got a job, baby girl. I start Monday. I am going to be someone you can be proud of. He sent the message and put the phone back in his pocket. He walked to his mother's apartment. It was Sunday.
He was supposed to come on Sunday. He knocked on her door and she opened it and saw his face and started crying. She already knew. Mothers always know. She pulled him inside and held him and did not let go for a long time. She made him coffee, she made him eggs, she made him toast with butter. He ate everything on his plate and asked for more. She gave him more. She sat across from him and watched him eat and cried the whole time. Happy tears, sad tears, all the tears she had been holding back for 11 months. Danny told her about Frank and the repair shop and the washing machine. He told her about Deborah at the employment center. He told her about the text from Mia. His mother held his hand and listened to every word. When he finished, she said, I told you. She said, I told you that you would find your way back. Danny said, I did not believe you. His mother said, I know, but I believed for both of us. He stayed at her apartment until the sun went down. He cleaned her kitchen and changed her air filters and fixed the drawer in her bedroom that had been stuck for 6 months. He did all the things he used to do before everything fell apart. It felt good to be useful. It felt good to be a son instead of a problem. Monday morning came fast. Danny woke up at the shelter before the lights came on. He put on his blue shirt and his wet sneakers and walked to Archer Avenue. He got to the repair shop at 6:45. Frank was already there.
He handed Danny a work shirt with Frank's appliance repair on the pocket. It was too big, but Danny did not care. He put it on over his blue shirt. Frank handed him a list of 5 repair jobs, 3 washing machines, 1 dryer, 1 refrigerator. The addresses were all over the south side. Frank pointed to a beat-up van in the parking lot. He said, take the van, bring it back with a full tank. Danny had not driven a car in 2 years. He got behind the wheel and sat there for a minute. Then he turned the key and the engine started and he pulled out of the parking lot. The first job was in a basement apartment on 83rd Street. An old woman named Mrs. Williams had a washing machine that would not drain. Danny took off the panel and checked the pump. It was clogged with a penny and a hair clip and $3 worth of loose change. He cleaned out the pump and ran the machine. It drained. Mrs. Williams tried to pay him $10 extra. Danny said no. He said Frank paid him enough. Mrs. Williams hugged him anyway. He could not remember the last time someone hugged him. The second job was a dryer in a house on Maplewood Avenue, Danny's old street. His heart started pounding when he saw the address. He parked the van and walked to the front door. A stranger opened it, a man he had never seen before. The man had a wife and 2 kids and a dog that barked at Danny's wet sneakers. Danny fixed the dryer in 20 minutes. The belt was loose. It was always the belt.
He did not look at the house next door, where he used to live. He did not look at the driveway where Mia learned to ride her bike. He fixed the dryer and left. He did not say anything to the man about living on this street. Some things did not need to be said. He did 4 more jobs that day. Each one was the same. Open the machine, find the problem, fix the problem, close the machine, move to the next one. It was the same work he had been doing his whole life, but it felt different now. It felt like coming home. It felt like putting on a coat you forgot you owned and realizing it still fit. Danny worked for Frank for 6 months. He showed up every day. He never missed a shift. He never showed up late. He fixed every machine Frank put in front of him. Frank started giving him more hours. Then he started giving him more money. $9 an hour, then 10, then 12. Danny saved every dollar he could. He stopped buying stale donuts. He started buying real food. He stopped sleeping at the shelter. He found a room in a boarding house on 77th Street. It was small. It was dirty. It had a bed and a window and a lock on the door. That was enough. That was more than enough. He sent money to his mother every week. Not much, just enough to help with her groceries and her medicine. She told him to stop. She said, "Save your money." He did not stop. He sent it anyway. He sent a little bit to Karen, too. Not as child support. He could not afford child support yet.
He sent it as something else, as an apology, as a promise. He did not know what to call it. He just knew he needed to send it. Mia started texting him more. Not every day, a few times a week. Short messages. How was work? Did you eat? I got an A on my history test. Small things, normal things. Things a daughter says to a father when they are learning how to talk to each other again. Danny answered every message within 5 minutes. He never wanted her to wait for him the way he had waited for her. He called her on her 15th birthday. She answered on the second ring. He said, "Happy birthday, baby girl." She said, "Thank you, Dad." He heard something in her voice that he had not heard in years. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but something close, something that sounded like maybe. The call lasted 7 minutes. They talked about school and her friends and a boy she liked who she was too scared to talk to. Danny told her to talk to the boy. He said the worst thing he could say was no. And if he said no, then he was not the right boy anyway. Mia laughed. Danny had not heard her laugh in 3 years. He closed his eyes and held the phone against his ear and listened to his daughter laugh. He saved that sound in his chest. He would carry it with him forever. Winter came again. Danny had been at Frank's shop for almost a year now. His sneakers were still wet some mornings, but now he had money for boots. He bought a pair of steel-toe work boots from the boot store on Cicero Avenue.
They cost $87. That was more money than he had spent on himself in 2 years. He wore them out of the store and walked down the sidewalk feeling like a different person. His feet were dry, his feet were warm, his feet did not squish when he walked. It was a small thing. It felt like everything. Frank started talking about retirement. He was 71 years old. His hands did not work the way they used to. His back hurt. His eyes were going. He told Danny he wanted to sell the shop. He asked Danny if he wanted to buy it. Danny laughed. He said, "Frank, I do not have that kind of money." Frank said, "I know, but the bank might." Frank took Danny to a small bank on Archer Avenue. They sat down with a loan officer named Mr. Patel. Mr. Patel asked questions about Danny's credit and his income and his plans for the business. Danny answered all of them honestly. He told Mr. Patel about the pills and the street and the 11 months in the shelter. Mr. Patel listened and nodded and asked more questions. Then he said he would need to think about it. Danny waited 3 days. He did not sleep. He barely ate. He fixed washing machines and dryers and refrigerators while his mind spun in circles. He thought about what it would mean to own something again, to have a place, to have a name on a door that was his name. He tried not to hope too much. Hope was dangerous. Hope had let him down before. On the 3rd day, Mr. Patel called. He said the bank was willing to take a chance on Danny Mercer. He said the loan was approved. Danny sat down on the floor of the repair shop and cried. Frank found him there 10 minutes later. Frank did not say anything. He just sat down on the floor next to Danny and put his old hand on Danny's shoulder. 2 men sitting on a dirty floor in a repair shop on Archer Avenue. Both of them crying. Both of them too old to be crying. Both of them not caring one bit. Danny signed the papers on a Friday. He became the owner of Frank's Appliance Repair on a Friday. He kept the name. He kept the sign. He kept Frank on as a part-time consultant because Frank did not know what to do with himself if he was not fixing things. Danny understood that. He did not know what to do with himself either for a long time. Now he knew. Now he fixed washing machines and dryers and refrigerators. Now he answered the phone when people called. Now he paid his taxes and his rent and his loan payment. Now he showed up every day. Because the business would not run itself. He moved out of the boarding house. He found a small apartment on 71st Street. It was a one-bedroom on the second floor of a brick building. The heat worked. The water was hot. The landlord was a woman named Mrs. Clark who reminded him of his mother. She asked for first and last month's rent and a security deposit. Danny wrote her a check. His first check in 3 years.
He stood in the empty apartment and looked at the walls and the floor and the window that faced the street. He sat down on the floor and put his head in his hands. He stayed there for a long time. He was not crying. He was just sitting, letting the walls hold him, letting the roof cover him, letting himself feel what it meant to have a place again. He invited Mia to see the apartment. She said yes. She came on a Saturday afternoon. Karen drove her. Karen did not come inside. She sat in the car with the engine running while Mia walked up the stairs alone. Danny opened the door and saw his daughter for the first time in 3 years. She was taller. She had her hair pulled back. She had her mother's eyes and his stubbornness. She stood in the doorway and looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Then Mia said, "Hi, Dad." Danny said, "Hi, baby girl." She walked inside and looked around the apartment. She looked at the kitchen and the bathroom and the bedroom. She looked at the couch Danny had bought from Goodwill. She looked at the table where he ate his meals. She looked at the picture of her on the wall. He had printed it at the library. It was the only picture in the apartment. Mia stood in front of it and did not say anything. Danny stood behind her and did not say anything either. She turned around and looked at him. She said, "I am proud of you." Danny started crying. He could not help it. He had held so much for so long, and those 4 words broke something open inside him. Mia started crying too. They stood in the middle of the small apartment and cried together, father and daughter, strangers and family, both of them trying to figure out how to be in the same room again. Mia stayed for 2 hours. They talked about everything and nothing. They talked about school and her friends and the boy she finally talked to. They talked about Danny's work and his customers and the washing machine that had a squirrel stuck in the motor. They did not talk about the pills or the street or the 11 months of silence. Some things did not need to be said. Some things were understood without words. When Mia left, she hugged him. A real hug, both arms, the kind of hug that says, "I am not letting go yet." She held on for a long time. Danny held on too. When she finally pulled away, she looked at him and said, "I love you, Dad." Danny said, "I love you too, baby girl, more than you will ever know." She walked down the stairs and got back in the car with Karen. The car pulled away from the curb and disappeared down 71st Street. Danny stood at the window and watched until he could not see the car anymore. Then he sat down on his couch and put his head back and closed his eyes. He thought about the man he used to be, the man who slept under the L tracks and carried wet sneakers through winter alleys and ate stale donuts in a laundromat because he had nowhere else to go.
That man was still inside him. That man would always be inside him. But that man was not all of who he was anymore. He thought about the morning he threw the pills down the storm drain. He thought about the janitor with the granola bar. He thought about Mrs. Jackson and Marcus and Deborah and Frank. He thought about all the people who saw him when he could not see himself, who gave him food when he was hungry, who gave him work when he had nothing, who gave him a chance when no one else would. He thought about his mother. She was still in her small apartment in Inglewood. Her COPD was worse now. She used oxygen at night, but she was still there, still waiting for him to come by on Sundays, still holding his hand, still telling him she was proud of him. He went to see her the next day. He brought her flowers. He brought her groceries. He brought her a new air filter for her window unit, even though it was winter. She asked him why he brought her flowers. He said, "Because you are my mother and I love you." She cried. He cried. They both cried. It was becoming a pattern. Spring came to Chicago. The snow melted, the temperature climbed. Danny opened the windows of his apartment and let the fresh air in. He stood at the window and looked at the street below. Kids were riding bikes. Men were washing cars in their driveways. Women were pushing strollers to the park. Normal life. Ordinary life. The kind of life he used to have. The kind of life he thought he would never have again.
His business was growing. People on the South Side needed their appliances fixed. They needed someone who would show up on time and do good work and charge a fair price. Danny did all of those things. He hired a young guy named Terrence who needed a second chance, just like Danny had needed one. Terrence was 22 years old. He had been in trouble with the law. He had a record. He could not find work anywhere. Danny did not care about the record. He cared about whether Terrence could fix a washing machine. Terrence could fix a washing machine. He could fix almost anything. Danny saw himself in the kid. He treated Terrence the way Frank had treated him, with respect, with patience, with the understanding that a man is more than the worst thing he has ever done. One night, Danny sat at his kitchen table and looked at his phone. The screen was still cracked in 3 places. He had money now. He could buy a new phone, but he did not want to. This phone had been with him through everything. This phone had held the messages from Mia. This phone had been his only lifeline when he had nothing else. He scrolled back through his texts, all the way to the beginning. He saw the messages he sent from the shelter and the library and the bus. I love you, baby girl. I am trying. I am sorry. I miss you. I love you. I love you. I love you. 335 messages sent into the void, and then one message back. Hi, Dad. He saved every single message. He would keep them forever.
They were proof that he never gave up. They were proof that he kept showing up, even when showing up felt pointless. They were proof that love does not stop just because someone stops answering. He thought about the prayer his mother taught him. God, please let me be somebody my daughter can be proud of. He had said that prayer 1,000 times, maybe more. He had said it on the street and in the shelter and in the library bathroom. He had said it when he was hungry and cold and scared and tired. He had said it when he did not believe anyone was listening. But someone must have been listening, because here he was, in an apartment, with a business, with a daughter who said she was proud of him. He did not have everything. He did not have Karen. She had moved on. She had met someone new, a good man from what Danny heard, a man with a steady job and a clean record and no missing years in his story. Danny was happy for her. He meant that. He really did. She deserved better than what he had given her. She deserved someone who did not break her trust and pawn her mother's ring and disappear into a cloud of pills. He hoped the new man was good to her. He hoped the new man was good to Mia. That was the only thing that mattered. Danny sat at his kitchen table late into the night. The apartment was quiet. The street was quiet. The whole city was quiet. He thought about the man he was now and the man he used to be, and all the steps in between.
He thought about the bus shelter and the laundromat and the shelter on 63rd Street. He thought about the cold and the hunger and the shame. He thought about the feeling of concrete through a thin blanket and the sound of the L train and the taste of coffee from a church basement. He thought about all of it, and he did not look away. Because that was the thing about surviving. You do not get to forget. You do not get to erase the hard parts and keep only the good ones. The hard parts are part of you now. They are in your bones and your blood and the way you see the world. They make you who you are. They make you grateful for things other people take for granted. A worn bed, a hot meal, a door that locks, a daughter who says I love you, a mother who still believes in you after everything. Danny stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the city that broke him, the city that saved him, the same city, the same streets, the same winter alleys where he carried his soaked sneakers through the cold. He was not that man anymore, but he would never forget that man. That man taught him something no one else could teach him. That man taught him that dignity is not something you have. It is something you keep, something you carry like a hidden treasure through the worst parts of your life, something you hold on to when everything else is gone. He looked at his reflection in the glass.
He saw a man with gray in his beard and lines on his face and eyes that had seen too much and not enough. He saw a man who had fallen and gotten up, and fallen again and gotten up again. He saw a man who was not perfect and never would be, but he also saw a man who was still here, still standing, still showing up, still fixing things, still loving his daughter even when she was not ready to love him back. He recognized himself again. Not the man he used to be, not the man on the roof or the man in the house on Maplewood Avenue. That man was gone. That man had died somewhere between the pills and the pawn shop and the night he threw everything away. The man in the window was someone new, someone who had been forged in the cold, someone who had learned the hard way what matters and what does not. The man in the window was someone his daughter could be proud of. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. Moral: you do not have to be the person you were yesterday. You do not have to be the person you were last year or last month or last week. Every morning you wake up and you get to choose who you become. Sometimes the choice is small. Sometimes the choice is huge. But it is always yours. Nobody else can make it for you. Danny Mercer chose to get up when getting up was the hardest thing he had ever done. He chose to send those texts even when nobody wrote back. He chose to walk into that employment center even when his pride told him to keep walking.
He chose to fix washing machines even when his hands hurt and his back ached and everything in him wanted to quit. He chose to become someone worth coming back to. And then he waited. He waited for his daughter to see it. He waited for his life to catch up to his choices. And it did. Not because the universe owed him anything, but because he kept showing up long enough for the door to open. So here is the question. What are you choosing today? Not tomorrow, not next week. Today. Right now. What are you choosing? Because the person you become is just the sum of all the choices you make when nobody is watching. Choose wisely. Choose bravely. Choose like your whole life depends on it. Because it does.